This is the truth about human desire that no one dares to admit. What truly captures a woman's heart isn't flowers, promises, or sweet words, but the quiet strength of a man she can't fully understand. Where there is depth, there is curiosity. Where there is mystery, there is attraction. And where there is attraction, obsession is born. This is the hidden, forbidden side of the human soul. The man who truly understands what moves a woman's heart and mind soon realizes something important. The game was never really about looks, muscles, or rehearsed charm. At the center of everything is power. Not loud, aggressive power, but subtle power. The kind of power that can influence without asking, that attracts without chasing. The kind of presence that becomes so strong, the other person slowly starts to orbit around it without even noticing. This is what nobody talks about. This is what gets hidden. Women don't become obsessed with predictable men, with men who are always available or perfectly polished. They become obsessed with mystery, with silent strength, with the man who doesn't explain himself, but carries an energy they keep trying to decode and never fully can. That's the first truth no dating guru ever tells you. Obsession begins when a woman feels that a man has a part of himself she cannot access, when she senses there is a deeper layer in his mind, something she wants to explore, but can't. The mistake most men make is revealing everything too fast. They open up their entire emotional world as if the woman were their therapist, forgetting one simple fact. The human mind does not truly value what it doesn't have to fight for. Obsession feeds on emotional scarcity, on mystery, on the feeling that there is more beneath the surface, but it remains hidden. When she tries to understand him and can't, interest becomes fascination. Fascination becomes desire. Desire becomes concern, and concern becomes obsession. Here's the real secret. A woman doesn't fall for what a man gives. She falls for what he keeps, for what she imagines he is, for what she believes he could offer, but hasn't yet. That's why a man who reveals everything loses power, and a man who disappears for no reason loses value. But a man who lives his own life, with his own rhythm, his silence, his goals, and an unshakable independence, that man creates a magnetic pull she can't resist. The more she tries to control him, the more he slips away. And the more he slips away, the more she tries to control. Female psychology doesn't work in straight lines. It works in spirals. A woman needs to feel like she is slowly moving deeper into a man's inner world, even if it's just step by step. If she feels stuck, she loses interest. If she gets too deep too fast, the mystery disappears. But if she feels she is getting closer, yet there is still a barrier she cannot cross, that's when real fascination is born. And fascination easily turns into obsession, not because the man manipulated her, but because he understands how the human mind truly works. What isn't fully available always takes up more space in the mind than what is already guaranteed. That's why many men who try too hard get ignored, while the ones who stay calm, centered, and quietly confident attract a completely different kind of attention. A woman realizes that this man's world does not revolve around her, and that triggers something ancient inside her. The instinct to prove her value, the instinct to win what feels hard to reach. Nothing is more intoxicating to the female mind than a man who doesn't bend, doesn't chase, and doesn't change himself just to please. He simply is who he is, and she is the one who must try to adapt, understand, and earn space in his world. Female obsession begins when a man becomes a mirror, one in which she sees both her strengths and her insecurities. When he doesn't overreact to her games, when he doesn't show exaggerated jealousy, when he doesn't lose control over small provocations, she realizes he has an inner fortress, an emotional strength she cannot shake, and that mystery pulls her in deeper. Most women will test. They'll push boundaries. If the man collapses, she loses interest. If he explodes, she loses respect. But if he stays calm, aware, unshaken, she feels like she's standing in front of something rare in today's world. A man who governs himself. And that, secretly, is what the female mind looks for. It's not about money, looks, or status. It's about posture, about the silence that carries authority, about the steady gaze that doesn't beg for approval. When a man doesn't try to impress, he becomes impressive. When he doesn't try to convince, he becomes convincing. When he doesn't bow, he becomes magnetic. But here's an even deeper truth. Women become obsessed with men who make them feel conflicting emotions. Not pain, but intensity. The human brain runs on dopamine, and dopamine is fueled by unpredictability, not routine. A predictable man creates comfort. An unpredictable man creates excitement. But there's a balance. Too predictable, boring. Too unpredictable, chaos. The man who masters the middle ground becomes addictive. When she feels admiration and frustration at the same time, closeness and distance, safety, and challenge. When she thinks she understands him, yet realizes she doesn't at all. That paradox becomes the perfect environment for obsession, because her mind keeps trying to solve the puzzle, to understand, to stabilize something that was never meant to be fully controlled. The masculine energy that truly attracts is solid, deep, calm, free, and not fully accessible. The truth no one tells is this: a woman doesn't become obsessed with the man who treats her like a princess, but with the man who makes her feel something she has never felt anywhere else. A sense of emotional exclusivity. A man who doesn't need her, but chooses her. A man who doesn't beg, but allows. A man who doesn't humiliate himself, but observes. A man who doesn't dramatize, but decides. Every woman wants to be chosen, but by a man she believes is above the average. And here is the point: you don't create obsession by chasing. You create it by becoming someone she fears losing. Not because of threats, but because of value. Real value. Personal value. Psychological value. The value of presence, energy, and independence. This is the beginning of what no one talks about. This is the first step of the Machiavellian spiral. A man who wants to understand female obsession must learn to see beyond appearances, because a woman rarely reveals what she truly feels. A woman expresses herself through subtlety, through contrast, through how she reacts to silence, far more than to words. Most men try to win her over by talking too much, explaining too much, justifying themselves endlessly. They don't realize that the more words they use, the weaker their presence becomes. What truly leaves a mark on a woman is not what you say, but what you communicate without saying a single word. The unspoken always weighs more than the spoken, and that invisible weight is what shapes her interest. A woman is drawn not by what she thinks when she's with you, but by what she feels. A man who creates emotion, curiosity, and tension takes up far more space in a woman's mind than the man who tries to convince her with logic, promises, or speeches about himself. And here is a truth most people can't handle. Women don't fall in love with your perfect, polite, politically correct version. They fall in love with your shadows, with the side of you that shows up without you noticing, with the controlled danger, the calm intensity, the unexpected gesture. They connect with what feels alive, not sanitized. The man who becomes obsessed with seeking women's approval dies as a man. He becomes a caricature of himself, an emotional servant. But the man who rebuilds himself to the point that he no longer needs validation from any woman, that man becomes magnetic. Female obsession is born when she realizes she has met a man who wants nothing from her, and because of that, she feels a powerful urge to earn something from him. When you ask for nothing, she wants to give everything. When you demand everything, she takes everything away. This paradox is constant, inevitable, and deeply rooted. One of the most Machiavellian secrets of female psychology is the power of selective presence. The man who is always available fades into the background. The man who disappears completely becomes irrelevant. But the man who appears when he chooses, and only when he chooses, creates a devastating effect. She begins to anticipate your presence. Imagine when you'll show up, what the moment will feel like, how your voice will sound at that exact time. And anticipation creates dopamine. And dopamine is what creates addiction. There is no obsession without neurochemistry, but there is an even deeper layer. A woman becomes obsessed with the man who confronts her emotionally, indirectly, not through aggression, but by revealing her truth without attacking her. When you see through her, when you recognize intentions she tries to hide, when you notice patterns she repeats unconsciously, when you perceive her insecurities before she ever admits them, she realizes you are not like other men. She realizes she can't manipulate you, and that realization alone attracts her more than any act of affection ever could. Female obsession begins when a woman meets a man who not only understands her behavior, but understands her nature, and that is rare, very rare. Most men react to the performance. Few see what's behind it. And when she notices that you understand her games, yet still remain unshaken, she begins to see something in you that others don't have. Inner command. And that is irresistible to the female psyche. A woman wants to enter the mind of a man who does not bend. She wants to understand what makes him strong, where he learned to become this way, why he doesn't break in storms that destroy other men. She wants to reach the part of him that nobody else can touch, and that is where obsession is born. When she feels that you are a mystery, that you welcome her but don't surrender, that you see her but don't submit, that you desire her but don't need her. Every woman is attracted to a man who wants her, but she only becomes obsessed with the man who doesn't depend on her. Male desire only becomes powerful in the best way when it is under control. And that control must be real, not an act. It must come from inner rebuilding, from a firm identity, from the place where no external validation can move you. The more grounded, independent, and emotionally solid you become, the more she tries to get closer. The more you stay loyal to yourself without shrinking your priorities to fit into hers, the more she feels she has found a rare man. And what is rare always creates obsession. She starts to analyze every gesture, every word, every silence, every look, trying to decode what you feel, what you want, what you think. And the more she tries to decode you, the more trapped she becomes in the attempt. Female obsession never comes from what is obvious. It comes from the mystery, from the feeling that you know something she doesn't, that you control something she can't, that you carry an energy she hasn't found anywhere else. No matter how beautiful, desired, or admired she is, every woman is drawn to the man who destabilizes her without disrespecting her, who challenges her without attacking, who desires her without worshipping, who understands her without exposing her. A man like that forces her out of autopilot. He triggers questions, awakens insecurity and comfort at the same time, creating an emotional maze she keeps trying to navigate but never fully controls. And here lies one of the darkest truths. She doesn't become obsessed with you. She becomes obsessed with the version of herself that only exists when she is with you. What truly hooks her is the feeling you awaken inside her, the kind of emotion she can't find with anyone else, the way she feels seen, and at the same time challenged. Obsession is never really about the man himself. It's about the psychological mirror he becomes in her life. When you awaken deeper layers of who she is, she attaches not to you, but to the version of herself that only exists around you. And as she tries to keep that feeling alive, she becomes fixated on your presence, your behavior, your attention. That's why, when a man withdraws emotionally, the woman feels like she's losing her mind. She isn't losing the man, she's losing the version of herself that only existed beside him. Few people can handle this truth, because it requires a level of self-control and self-knowledge that most never reach. But once you understand it, you realize you don't need to perform, impress, or fake anything to be unforgettable. You simply become a man who touches the female subconscious. And that only happens when you master your own subconscious first. That is the true Machiavellian essence of the game. It's not about manipulating others, it's about mastering yourself so deeply that others are naturally affected by your presence. And that is only the beginning. Real female obsession is not born from big gestures, but from small ones. Ordinary men think they need to impress, shock, or perform to get attention. But the man who truly echoes in a woman's soul doesn't need any of that. He impacts through how he simply exists in the room, through the rhythm of his breathing, the silence that carries strength, the subtle gaze that doesn't ask for permission. A woman senses these details unconsciously, and that's why she's drawn in without knowing exactly why. Her body reacts before her mind can explain it. Her subconscious responds before logic ever forms words. And that mystery is what creates obsession, the inability to fully describe what she feels. The less she understands the source of the fascination, the stronger it becomes. Because the human mind is programmed to solve what it doesn't understand, and the more it tries to solve it, the more it gets trapped. A man who raises more questions than answers becomes addictive. She starts to analyze everything: the tone of your voice, the pause between your messages, the way you look at the world, how you react under pressure. She builds theories, interpretations, assumptions, and the more she analyzes, the more space you occupy inside her. But here's the part few understand. A woman only becomes obsessed with a man when he makes her feel both safety and danger at the same time. Not physical danger, but emotional danger. The danger of not fully controlling the situation. The danger of not knowing if she is enough. The danger of not being able to predict what you'll do next. It's an inner game, because every woman, no matter how strong or independent, carries a deep instinct to test, challenge, provoke, and measure a man. These aren't attacks, but subconscious ways of discovering whether your masculinity is real or just a fragile mask. And most men collapse under these tests without ever realizing what's happening. Some men beg for validation. Others overreact emotionally. Others try to argue to regain control. All of them lose. But the solid man, he doesn't enter the battle. He watches. He understands. He doesn't get shaken because he doesn't see the test as a threat, but as proof of human nature. He doesn't react emotionally. He responds with presence. He doesn't escalate the drama. He dissolves it, simply by not being affected by it. And that's when the woman feels it. This man cannot be manipulated. And if he cannot be manipulated, he is rare. And rarity creates obsession, because it forces a woman to leave the surface. She realizes she cannot control you with charm, emotional games, or tactics. And this takes her to a mental state very few people ever trigger in her: vulnerability. Real feminine vulnerability does not appear when she cries or opens up emotionally. That can be performance, strategy, or impulse. True vulnerability appears when she realizes the man in front of her cannot be shaped by her, that he does not follow the script she expects, that he is an independent force guided by his own inner compass. And in that moment, she feels she has encountered something that transcends her. And what transcends us, we try to possess. It is automatic, human, psychological. Obsession always begins at the point where she realizes that she cannot control you, but still needs you, or at least needs the feeling you awaken inside her. And that feeling is not about romance, it is about intensity. The man who awakens emotional intensity becomes unforgettable. That intensity may come through total calm, through firmness, through quiet emotional depth. It is not shouting, not chaos, not forced passion. It is silent strength. A woman becomes obsessed when she realizes that you are a man she cannot easily replace. The world is full of insecure men, needy men, men willing to reshape themselves to please. But the man who is a rock, not cold but steady, becomes a gravitational center. She feels that, beside him, her life shifts axis. She realizes that in his presence, she accesses a deeper version of herself, more intense, more alive, more instinctive. And that is what she wants to keep. And because she wants to keep it, she begins to fear losing it. Fear creates attachment. Attachment creates vigilance. Vigilance becomes emotional dependence. And dependence becomes obsession. But there is something even deeper. Every woman carries a secret fantasy of meeting a man who can see beyond the mask. A man who sees her fears, her strength, her vulnerabilities, her contradictions, not to judge, but to understand. Because a woman lives in a world where she almost always has to perform. A woman feels she must be strong yet gentle, desirable yet independent, sweet yet rational. She constantly balances different versions of herself just to survive socially. So when she meets a man who truly sees beyond that, who senses her restless soul, her subtle insecurities, her quiet inner conflicts, she feels something rare: relief. And people don't become obsessed with what hurts. They become obsessed with what brings relief. But that relief only works when it is mixed with challenge. If you understand her completely, she will admire you for a moment, then grow bored. If you only challenge her but don't understand her depth, she will discard you. The real point of obsession lies in the balance between seeing her soul, while still remaining partially inaccessible. Seeing without bowing. Understanding without submission. Listening without blindly obeying. Admiring without idolizing. A woman becomes attached to the man who gives her about 70% of what she wants and keeps 30% out of reach. Those 30% are the seed of obsession. And there is something even deeper. A woman becomes obsessed with the man who transforms her, even if she never admits it. And the most powerful transformation is emotional. When you awaken the feelings she tries to suppress: jealousy, desire, frustration, admiration, fear of losing you, intense curiosity, she begins to question herself, she begins to analyze herself, and she begins to study you. And by studying you, you become the exception in her life, and the exception always takes up more mental space than the ordinary. That's why female obsession is never logical. She doesn't evaluate your value rationally. She feels something she cannot explain, tries to understand it, fails, tries again, fails again. And that endless loop traps her mind around you. the more unsolved the feeling is, the more she returns to its source, you. Real obsession is born when she realizes you are the only man she cannot categorize, the only one who doesn't fit the patterns, the only one who doesn't react like the rest, the only one who remains himself no matter the situation. A man who knows who he is carries a silent power that no woman can resist, not out of submission, but out of magnetism. And that magnetism comes from inner integrity. A woman does not become obsessed with a man simply because he is kind, good, polite, or attractive. She becomes obsessed with the man who awakens in her a sense of emotional uniqueness. It doesn't matter how many men exist in the world, how many want her or chase her. Obsession is born when she realizes that this one specific man makes her feel something no one else does. And the truth most people hide is this: that feeling doesn't come from loud gestures, but from a quiet combination of presence, posture, and depth. The man who awakens obsession doesn't chase, but he also doesn't disappear like a child. He exists in the middle ground, where his presence is powerful, but his absence is also felt. He leaves a mark through the way he looks, the way he listens, the way he reacts, the way he stands in the world. The woman senses that there is an inner flow guiding him, something that does not depend on circumstances. That inner direction unsettles her and fascinates her at the same time. She realizes she is standing before a man whose value was not built to impress others, but was born from within, and that is exactly why she feels the need to win him. But there is still a deeper truth. A woman becomes obsessed with the man who makes her question her own identity. When you awaken contradictory emotions inside her, vulnerability and strength, fear and desire, independence and need, she begins to see herself from new angles. She realizes that there is a part of her that only wakes up when she is near you. And that discovery is addictive, because no one likes losing access to their own intensity. The man who leads her into that emotional depth, even unintentionally, becomes an emotional anchor in her life. It's not about games, it's about psychological impact. Ordinary men try to win women through predictability. Rare men don't try. They attract naturally, because their energy speaks to the deeper layers of the female psyche. And that kind of energy is almost never found in a man who spends his life begging for approval. The energy that creates obsession is born from self-knowledge, silence, maturity, and a quiet inner darkness, not destructive, but stable. A woman can feel when a man has turned his pain into strength. She senses when he has faced himself and won. She senses when he no longer fears losing anyone, because he has already learned how to survive alone. That emotional independence is the most dangerous and most magnetic key of all. When a woman realizes that you don't need her to exist, but you choose her anyway, she feels something deeply human, privilege. A man who doesn't need her, yet still connects with her, gives her a sense of inner pride, and at the same time awakens the fear of losing that choice. This quiet fear creates a psychological bond, one that grows stronger every time you show that your life continues with or without her. Obsession is born when she realizes she does not fully control how you act, when she notices that you can walk away if you choose, that you don't panic when she distances herself. And that emotional detachment makes her feel, maybe for the first time, that her place beside you is not guaranteed. Certainty kills desire. Uncertainty feeds it. Not toxic uncertainty, but the natural uncertainty that comes from your independence. The man who tries to prove himself becomes predictable. The man who uses techniques to win becomes obvious. The man who tries to impress becomes disposable. But the man who simply lives, who follows his path without asking permission, who has his goals, his rituals, his discipline, who does not search a woman's eyes for validation of his worth, that man becomes unforgettable. He becomes a reference point, and reference points cannot be replaced. Female obsession grows in silence. It starts small, a doubt about you, a curiosity about your past, a question about what you feel. Slowly, that attention expands. She thinks of you when she wakes up, when she goes to sleep, when something reminds her of your energy. She starts comparing you to other men, and they all feel smaller. She reads more deeply into your messages, analyzes your silences, looks for patterns in your behavior, and before she realizes it, she is emotionally invested. And the more invested she becomes, the more she wants reciprocity. and the more she seeks reciprocity, the more value you gain. This cycle is inevitable. The human mind clings to whatever requires effort, whatever is difficult to access, whatever demands emotional investment. That is why obsession never grows from what is easy. It is born from complexity, from unpredictability, from the man who doesn't reveal everything, but doesn't disappear either, from the man who allows himself to be seen just enough, as if his inner world were a labyrinth she keeps trying to map, but never fully finishes. And the more she tries to map you, the more lost she feels, and the more lost she feels, the more trapped she becomes. But there is something even more Machiavellian in female psychology. A woman becomes obsessed when she feels that you see parts of her that even she tries to ignore. When you notice the fragility behind her strength, the fear behind her confidence, the insecurity behind her apparent pride. When you read her expressions, her pauses, her silences, she wants to be understood, but fears being exposed, and when she finds a man who understands her without exposing her, she feels a rare mix of safety and loss of control. It's as if you can see her soul, but choose to protect it rather than use it against her. That kind of emotional perception is rare, and everything rare becomes an object of desire. Obsession is born from the extraordinary, not the ordinary, from depth, not surface, from the man who sees through the mask, not the man impressed by it. And when she realizes that you can see her essence without judging her, a connection is born that she herself cannot explain. She feels that she needs to be near you, and that need is the turning point, because wanting is light, but needing is dangerous. When she needs you, she thinks more. When she thinks more, she feels more. When she feels more, she fears more. And when she fears, she clings. And every emotional watchfulness is the beginning of obsession. A woman becomes obsessed with the man who makes her feel both enchanted and vulnerable. A man who makes her feel that what she's living cannot simply be replaced. And the strangest part? The more she tries to hide this feeling, the more it grows. Female obsession is almost always silent, rarely spoken. It shows up in details, in subtle jealousy, in extra care, in intense curiosity, in the unconscious search for your presence. And before she realizes it, you already live inside her more than you should. The truth is, human connections are always darker than people admit out loud. Feelings are not born from perfection, but from fractures, not from certainty, but from what is missing. That is why the deepest connections are never perfectly balanced or neatly defined. They are born in the shadows, where instinct and reason collide without warning. And no matter how rational a woman seems, she walks through an emotional world extremely sensitive to that collision. She does not seek only happiness, she seeks intensity. And that is what most men never understand. Intensity is worth more than stability, as long as it doesn't destroy. The man who awakens intensity becomes a memory. The man who offers only safety becomes routine. Safety is comfortable, but never unforgettable. What truly marks the soul is contrast, the feeling of standing before someone who carries both light and darkness in the right measure. A man made only of light becomes boring. A man made only of darkness becomes frightening. But the man who carries a solid core wrapped in emotional depth she can feel, but never fully understand, that man creates a fascination that is hard to erase. Because the human mind was never built for solved mysteries, it was built to chase the ones that open slowly. A woman doesn't cling to what she already understands, she clings to what she still feels the need to discover. And the most fascinating part is this: the man doesn't need to do anything for this to happen. There is no trick, no formula. It comes from the way he sees himself and the world. The man who has already descended into his own depths, who has faced his fears, his failures, his loneliness, his emptiness, returns from that place with a gaze that both disturbs and attracts at the same time. He doesn't talk about it, but he carries it in his silence. And a woman always senses it. Her subconscious reads that depth like an invisible language. She feels that this man has seen things she hasn't seen, felt pain she has never felt, matured in ways she hasn't yet reached. And that awakens a mix of reverence and restlessness. People talk a lot about masculine strength, but almost always in the wrong way. True strength isn't arrogance, dominance, or the need to appear superior. True strength is silent. It is the ability to remain unbroken when the world tries to bend you. It is the man who carries scars without turning them into a flag, the one who suffered but didn't become a victim, who fell but didn't become bitter, who lost but didn't lose himself. This man carries an energy so dense that she feels it before she understands it, and that energy reaches her deeply. A woman is not drawn to theatrical strength, but to inner solidity that needs no announcement. She feels it in how he speaks, how he observes, how he decides, how he walks, in the fact that he doesn't need to defeat anyone to feel victorious. He doesn't compete, he doesn't chase admiration, he simply exists, with grounding. And that solidity awakens something ancient in her, an instinct to move closer to what feels safe and intense at the same time. It is not physical protection she feels, but emotional protection. The kind that only exists in a man who knows his own chaos and is no longer afraid of it. But there's an even deeper layer. A woman feels fascination for the man who cannot be easily decoded, because he does not mold himself to the world's expectations. He doesn't react in predictable ways. He is not dazzled by every compliment. He is not shaken by rejection. He doesn't change when tested. And above all, he does not run from his own shadow. The man who runs from himself lives tense, defensive, reactive. The man who has faced his shadow lives calm, but a deep calm, like an ocean that seems still on the surface, yet hides ancient storms beneath. This duality is irresistible. And what few admit is this: female obsession, and male obsession too, in different forms, is born from this type of presence. A presence that forces you to feel differently, think differently, confront parts of yourself that were once asleep. When she meets a man like this, she doesn't just meet someone interesting, she meets a mirror. And real mirrors don't just reflect beauty, they reflect vulnerability, insecurity, strength, desire, fear, all at once. And she experiences this as a silent invitation to go deeper. The psychological impact happens when she realizes that in front of this man, she cannot hide. Not because he exposes her, but because her mask stops working. She realizes that her social strategies lose power. Her charm doesn't control anything. Her rehearsed personas dissolve, and that moment changes everything. This realization doesn't diminish her, it frees her. She feels that she has finally found a space where she can exist in a more raw, more real, more intense form. And that experience is rare, and the rarer it is, the more unforgettable it becomes. What most people don't understand is that intensity is not created by how you treat a woman, but by how you treat yourself. The man who abandons himself to please others loses his energy. But the man who remains firm, even when he likes someone, keeps his dignity. And dignity is one of the greatest psychological triggers of attraction. There is no intensity without respect, and there is no respect without clear inner boundaries. And when a woman senses those boundaries, it creates something almost spiritual inside her, the feeling of standing before someone who truly belongs to himself. And whoever belongs to himself naturally awakens desire in others. But the deepest and most Machiavellian truth is this: a woman doesn't fall for the man who simply sees her. She falls for the man who transforms her without ever touching her. The transformation happens when a man's presence awakens forgotten parts of her soul. The sensitive one, the instinctive one, the vulnerable one, the wild one, the intense one. The more she feels that she is returning to who she truly is, the more she associates that feeling with the man who awakened it. And this psychological bond is far stronger than any superficial charm. The man who understands himself doesn't need to manipulate anyone. He becomes naturally magnetic because he carries inside him a truth the world constantly tries to hide. That depth is frightening but attractive, that the shadow disturbs but liberates. That intensity demands courage but rewards it. He doesn't perform, he simply is. And that alone is enough to make someone feel that they have found something far too rare to ignore. And this is how obsession is born, not as the desire to own another person, but as the desire to remain in the presence that awakens life. The presence that provokes, calms, disorients, and strengthens. The presence of someone who lives so intensely that everyone who gets close feels it. And what comes after that is even deeper. There is something profoundly unsettling about how humans react to those who awaken their hidden layers. A woman who has never met a man who makes her feel true intensity ends up believing that love is predictable, soft, domesticated. But when she comes across someone whose presence silences her mind and lights her soul at the same time, she realizes that everything she lived before was only a pale shadow. And it is exactly this contrast that marks the beginning of the most powerful bond. The moment she notices that she has begun to think about someone she does not fully understand, and maybe never will. This emotional incompleteness is the deepest trigger in human psychology. Not something someone does, but something someone is. The mind remembers most intensely the things that don't have an ending. A woman tries to understand the rare man, the deep man, the man who doesn't react in obvious ways. But the more she tries, the more he escapes definition. It's like trying to hold water in your hands. The tighter you grip, the faster it slips away. And this inability to define him creates in her a soft, constant discomfort. And discomfort is the seed of fixation. The man who has never explored himself spends life trying to become something. The man who has already descended into his own darkness and returned transformed no longer tries to become anything. He is simply what remains after everything else has fallen away. This authenticity is not polished, not pretty, not staged for social media. It is raw, dense, full of silences that carry stories. And this depth awakens something ancient in a woman, an instinctive recognition. She senses something she cannot name. He has lived, he has fallen, he has rebuilt himself. And this perception creates an invisible thread between two inner worlds. But there is something even darker. She is not only fascinated by his silent strength, but by the subtle threat of his freedom. A man who belongs to himself, who keeps his own axis, who needs no one to validate his existence, creates a strangely delicious discomfort. He is not guaranteed, he is not predictable, he is not controlled by social dynamics, he is shifting ground, full of depths she can only sense. And this feeling that she has found something she cannot control awakens a primitive state of emotional alertness in her. What almost no one understands is this. Female desire doesn't attach itself to the man who offers everything, but to the man who offers a small amount of something rare. Not abundance, but exclusivity. Not excess, but intensity. Not constant presence, but rare moments so deep that she replays them in her mind for days. Ordinary men try to win through consistency, but consistency without depth creates emotional numbness. The deep man, however, attracts without trying, because his silence carries more weight than other men's words. This is the Machiavellian truth no one admits. Masculine presence carries such symbolic weight that it can alter someone's emotional state without effort. When a woman meets a man who does not dilute himself, who does not try to please, who does not change his posture depending on the situation, she feels she is standing before something rare. Too rare. And everything rare awakens the instinct to preserve it. She wants to keep it close, protect it. And it is exactly this desire to preserve that creates unease. What if I lose it? The female mind attaches itself to what it fears losing. This is not manipulation, it is psychology. Humans fixate more on uncertainty than on what is guaranteed. Certainty creates comfort, uncertainty creates depth, and the man who lives unafraid of losing anyone because he has already learned to survive abandonment, loneliness, silence, becomes the living embodiment of that uncertainty. He is what she wants, but cannot control. He is what attracts her, but does not depend on her. He is what awakens her, but never fully surrenders. And this is where the dynamic grows even darker. She realizes that unlike other men, this one does not react to provocation, does not emotionally collapse, does not resent distance. He doesn't try to prove anything, he remains centered, as if he lives on another frequency. And living on another frequency is frightening, because it means he will never fully belong to her. He will only stay as long as he chooses. His freedom is what attracts her, and what torments her. Freedom is both beauty and threat, and it is this mixture that binds her. A man who has become whole on his own carries a magnetism that cannot be manufactured. He does not radiate desperation, or neediness, or hunger for attention. He moves from his own inner flow. And when she realizes this, something inside her shifts. She feels that she must deserve his presence, even if she never admits it. And this feeling, not humiliation but recognition, leads her into an emotional depth few superficial relationships ever reach. But there is a deeper, darker, truer layer still. A woman is drawn to the man who makes her feel alive. And life is not comfort. Life is expansion. It is contrast. It is intensity. It is the heart racing for reasons she cannot explain. It is the quiet sense that something important is happening, even when nothing is. A deep man carries silent storms inside him, and a woman feels those storms as if they were her own. She feels the mystery, the melancholy, the strength, the calm. And this creates a bond that nothing in the modern world can artificially reproduce. The truth no one speaks is this. A woman does not become obsessed with the man who treats her like a queen. She becomes obsessed with the man who awakens the version of herself she lost along the way. The vulnerable version, the intuitive version, the intense version, the deeply feminine version that was silenced by everyday rationality. A deep man brings back her forgotten nature, the most instinctive, sensitive, authentic part of her. And when she reconnects with that part, she begins to associate it with him. And that is the most powerful psychological bond that exists. She doesn't only want the man, she wants what she becomes in his presence. And when someone longs not for the person, but for the version of themselves that is reborn beside them, there is no greater emotional force. It is the oldest bond in humanity. There comes a point in the human experience when a person stops being just a person and becomes a symbol. This happens rarely, extremely rarely, often unnoticed until the consequences are beyond rational control. When a woman meets a man whose energy touches inner regions she herself never knew existed, something inside her begins to redefine him, not as an ordinary individual, but as a living archetype. He stops being only a man and becomes the embodiment of something she lost, searched for, or feared her entire life. This process is never conscious, nor could it be. The unconscious decides who becomes essential. And once it decides, the conscious mind only watches. Obsession is not born from wanting another person, but from the inability to ignore them. And that inability appears when the other person comes to represent something greater than themselves. It's at this point that the female psyche dives into a depth that rarely reaches the surface. The woman begins to see in that man an entryway to parts of herself that were once locked away. He becomes a portal, not a partner. A mirror, not a companion. An enigma, not an answer. And enigmas are never abandoned. Enigmas are pursued. The darkest part of this process is that the woman doesn't realize she's doing it. She believes she is in love with the man, with his presence, his personality, his eyes, his silence. But the true object of fixation is internal. It is who she becomes when she is near him. A man who has rebuilt himself, who has known his own shadow, who has touched his own ruins and risen from them, carries something the modern world has erased: depth. Not intellectual depth, not philosophical depth, but emotional, existential. Something that cannot be studied, copied, or performed. Something that is only born when a person has had to reinvent themselves from nothing. And that depth unsettles a woman. It stirs her. It disarms her. A masculine presence that doesn't need to prove itself fills a room in silence. He doesn't need to raise his voice or impose anything. He simply exists with weight. Not a weight that suffocates, but a weight that reorders. The atmosphere shifts when he enters, not because he tries to change it, but because he carries inner order. He lives aligned with his own axis. And this is so rare that the female mind, used to scattered, anxious, needy, unstable men, instantly recognizes that something here is different. Not better. Different. Singular. And everything singular occupies mental space. She begins to watch this man more closely than she wants to admit. She notices that he does not react to provocation, but neither does he fake indifference. He doesn't react, he responds. He doesn't chase, he moves with purpose. He doesn't seek, he chooses. Every gesture seems to arise from an inner center to which she has no access, and that center becomes a mystery. It isn't who he is that intrigues her, but what sustains him, what shaped him, what exists behind that steady silence. Her mind tries to probe, predict, imagine, and fails. Every time. And the impossibility of reaching his core creates a gravitational pull that is hard to resist. This is where psychology becomes Machiavellian. The woman slowly begins to shape herself emotionally around him without realizing it. Small things change. She starts interpreting her own behavior through the impact she imagines it would have on him. She begins to weigh her words unconsciously, asking herself, how would he see this? She begins to measure her own emotions with him as the reference point. This is the most dangerous and the deepest moment, because the man becomes an internal scale inside her psyche. She starts to live a part of her inner world in relation to his presence, even when he isn't there. The symbolic transformation happens when he stops being himself and becomes what he represents. He becomes the emotional anchor against which she compares everything. His gaze becomes the gaze she longs to deserve. His silence becomes the approval she wishes to earn. His freedom becomes the space she fears and desires at the same time. He becomes a reference point, and references are not abandoned. They are carried into the very structure of the personality. This depth awakens something ancient in the female psyche, the need to find someone who represents the inner axis she once lost. The modern woman lives in a fragmented, accelerated, chaotic world. She searches for emotional stability, but finds none. She searches for depth, but finds distraction. She searches for truth, but finds performance. So when she meets a man who does not pretend, who does not follow the social script, who does not chase applause or validation, she realizes she is standing before an exception. And exceptions are dangerous because by definition, an exception breaks the pattern. And everything that breaks the pattern reconfigures the emotional universe. And the most striking part is that the man does nothing to make this happen. He doesn't provoke, he doesn't manipulate, he doesn't force anything. He simply lives with an inner intensity strong enough to radiate something the world no longer offers. And whatever the world does not offer, when finally found, becomes priceless. Priceless enough to awaken fear. The woman begins to quietly feel that she could not afford to lose such a presence, and to avoid losing it, she moves closer, and the closer she gets, the more he confronts her with who she truly is, not who she pretends to be. And that confrontation is both liberating and terrifying. This is where the deepest layer of psychology emerges. The man who reveals her inner contradictions becomes unforgettable. Because every woman, no matter how strong or rational, carries inside herself parts that never had the chance to be expressed. Fragility, insecurity, instinct, desire, fear. The man who awakens these parts, not to control them, but simply by existing with authenticity, opens doors inside her that were never opened before. And whoever opens psychological doors is never forgotten. There is no deeper bond than the bond with the one who reveals your soul to you, even without knowing it. The woman begins to associate this man with her own inner awakening. He becomes the bridge between her and her depth. And nothing, absolutely nothing, carries more emotional power than this. This is the moment when she begins not only to project feelings onto him, but meanings. He becomes the man who represents what she lost, what she never had, what she didn't know she desired, what she feared finding, and what she cannot explain. And when someone becomes a meaning, they stop being forgettable. There comes a moment when everything changes, and it almost always happens in silence. No announcement, no declaration, no visible milestone. The transformation happens in the invisible space between one thought and another, between one glance and the next, between an absence and the memory it leaves behind. It is the moment a woman realizes that this man is no longer simply someone she admires, desires, or tries to understand, but has become part of her internal structure. A living element inside her that changes not only what she feels, but how she feels everything. And this is the deepest, darkest, most delicate point of human psychology, when the other person stops existing outside and begins existing inside. Psychological fixation rarely reveals itself immediately. First come the subtle signs, the curiosity that never leaves, the involuntary analysis, the silent comparison with every other man, the quiet realization that no other presence produces the same internal impact. And then there's a single instant, one she almost never admits to herself, when she realizes she is no longer viewing him from the outside. She has begun to live herself through him. He has become the reference point. And when someone becomes your emotional reference, everything reorganizes around them. This is the point of no return. The moment she realizes she can no longer see herself without the impact he has had. Not because she needs him, but because the version of herself that came alive in his presence feels so much more vibrant, more complete, more intense, that returning to who she was before feels like an unforgivable regression. The human mind, once expanded, never returns to its former size. The same is true of the heart. And what makes this bond so powerful is that it was not built through manipulation, tricks, or effort. It was built simply through who he is, through the weight of his presence, the depth in his eyes, the steadiness in his silence, the density of his story. The woman senses, even without words, that this man carries inside him a world she has never seen in anyone else, and that makes him an emotional singularity. Singularities have gravity of their own. And this is where the most Machiavellian phenomenon of the human psyche emerges. When someone becomes part of your internal narrative, what happens outside no longer matters. He now exists as a symbol, as an axis, as a mirror, and symbols cannot be replaced. Actors do not move easily, and mirrors that reveal the soul cannot be ignored. The woman begins to feel that this man was not just a presence in her life, he was a rupture, and ruptures leave scars even when they are beautiful. This depth creates a strange effect. The more she tries to rationalize what she feels, the less sense it makes. She can list his flaws, remember moments of distance, compare him to other men, even try to convince herself that all of this is an exaggeration. But the mind does not operate on the surface when something has touched the unconscious. Nothing replaces what stirs the depths. The man who reaches that layer is not merely remembered, he becomes inevitable. The inevitable is what returns even when you try to push it away. It appears in dreams, in silences, in moments of stillness. It is what you try to expel, but somehow finds another door back in. The human mind, when deeply marked, does not remember what it wants. It remembers what it needs. And she needs him, not as a concrete person, but as what he represents, the intensity that was missing, the truth that awakened, the vulnerability she avoided, the strength she admired, the depth she feared. And all of this forms the strongest bond that exists, the symbolic bond. The man ceases to be an individual and becomes an archetype. He becomes, within her psyche, the figure that symbolizes emotional expansion itself. He is the event. He is the breaking point. He is the memory that reorganizes every other memory. Even if he leaves, even if he disappears, even if time dissolves his presence, what he triggered remains. The inner transformation is irreversible, and that is why she never returns to who she was before. The man who awakened forgotten versions of her will never be just someone who passed through. He becomes the dividing line. From him onward, she separates those who came before from those who came after. He becomes the standard, not of behavior, not of attitude, but of depth. And this is the darkest, most powerful truth of human relationships. Whoever truly awakens you never disappears completely. They remain as an impression, a mark, a luminous shadow. And this luminous shadow may follow a person for years, sometimes for life. Not because of dependence, but because of transcendence. The emotional experience you once lived with someone who touched you deeply becomes the reference point for every experience after. And no matter how much you grow, evolve, mature, a part of you always continues to dialogue with that original memory, the memory of having been awakened. And the most extraordinary part is that this phenomenon does not depend on reciprocation, on contact, or on outcome. It is internal, psychological, existential. The mark remains because the transformation remained, and transformation does not erase. A man who lives with intensity, awareness, and depth leaves marks even without meaning to. He becomes a presence even in his absence. And the woman who has encountered something like this knows deep in her soul that she will never find the same again. Not because there are no other men, but because no other will ever be the one who awakened her for the first time. And this is what makes the process so Machiavellian, so inevitable, so profoundly human. The real impact is not what you provoke in another person, but what that person discovers within themselves because of you. And inner discovery is the kind of experience no one ever abandons. A person may leave, move on, build another life, but the reference remains like a shining scar, forever inscribed in the soul. In the end, the man who awakens depth does not imprison anyone, he frees them. But paradoxically, it is exactly this freedom that makes him unforgettable. Because whatever is free, rare, and profound never dies in memory.